Good morning everybody, wakey wakey, it's time for morning glory. My name is MC Kalia and I'll be your captain for the next 1 hour 30 minutes. Let's have this conversation going. Good morning everybody, wakey wakey, it's time for morning glory. My name is MC Kalia and I'll be your captain for the next 1 hour 30 minutes. Let's have this conversation going. Good morning everybody, wakey wakey, it's time for morning glory. My name is MC Kalia and I'll be your captain for the next 1 hour 30 minutes. Let's have this conversation going. Good morning, everybody. Wakey, wakey. It's time for Morning Glory. My name is MC Kalia, and I'll be your captain for the next 1 hour, 30 minutes. Let's have this conversation going.
The 23rd day of February 2023. This is the Morning Glory Show. My name is MC Kalia, and welcome to the most comprehensive talk show in Kenya today. For the next few minutes, we shall just be discussing everything that touches on sexual exploitation. Sexual exploitation actually has been a topic since I think Wednesday, when actually BBC aired a story highlighting the exploitation that is being experienced by workers working in tea estate in Kericho, owned by multinationals. But then after that, you realize that many women came out to say that they've experienced the same in other workplaces, showing that the cases are rampant. But then against that, you'd also see that men have come out to say they also go through sexual exploitation. So with me in studio are two ladies. We have Miss Munywa, yeah, if I'm getting that right, and also Madam Ngeny, who prefers to be called Cheruta for some reason. And they're here to just help us iron out these issues, to understand them. Miss Munywa is an advocate of the High Court who's been practicing for the last 10 years, most of the time tackling cases that touch on human rights. We have Ms. Ngeny, who is an anti-GBV activist, interacting with these cases daily. What is the experience of all this? And the question today would be, have you ever come across sexual exploitation at some point, at any point in your life? And to just take us right into this, I would be asking the same question to my guest, and I'll start with Ms. Munywa. Of course, I'll start by saying hi to our guest, then answer the question. Have you at any point of your life come across sexual exploitation?
Good morning, Kalia. So you got my name right. I've come across sexual harassment, yes. So, but not I would say not high grade kind of sexual harassment, just hints and tonations which you would basically just tell them off harshly, and I think most of the time whoever the co-worker or the superior usually gets the idea that you're not interested, and most of the time, all the time it has worked for me, but yeah, I have come across it.
Okay, thank you so much for that, and welcome to the Morning Glory Show. Also with us is, of course, I said Sharon Cheruto Ngeny. Now I have to say all the three names because she prefers other names in her name. Okay, now I don't know how to explain this, but in your life, in your experiences as a worker, have you ever experienced any form of sexual exploitation?
Thank you, Kalia. My name is Sharon Cheruto Ngeny, as you've said, and I'm really glad to be here this morning. And I am an anti-GBV activist, and I have seen cases of sexual exploitation. It happens all the time. I have experienced it a few times, and it is in the workplaces, it is in our homes, it is in institutions. So what BBC just did was to bring the discussion. Otherwise, it happens all the time, such that it even worries us that why is it becoming very normal, you know? So I hope it's past a discussion that eventually leads to tangible solutions that lead to the end of sexual exploitation. Yes. Okay,
thank you so much for that. And of course, if you already tuned in, let me know where you tuned in from. And of course, answer the same question. Have you in your life ever experienced a sexual exploitation? And definition of terms here would be a very important thing, because we have sexual exploitation, we have sexual abuse, and there is sexual harassment. All of them building into the same thing. Sexual, gender-based violence. Of course, we've had this discussion before, but then after that particular expose, you would notice that sexual exploitation for favors or rather, then we would say sex for favors is something that is big in this country. And I love the UNHCR explanation, or rather definition of sexual exploitation. They say it is defined as an actual attempt of abuse of a person, abuse of someone's position of vulnerability, such as such a person depending on you for maybe survival, food, or job, or any other thing. And it is actually differential power or trust to obtain sexual favors, including but not by offering money or other economic or political advantages. Some other definitions of sexual exploitation includes prostitution. At this juncture, I would actually want us now to get to actually identify, first of all, cases of sexual exploitation that happen in our society today. And I'll be starting with Ms. Munywa once again. Does the law at any point define sexual exploitation?
Yes, the law does specify sexual exploitation by definition. And there are various types of sexual exploitation. There is sexual harassment, there is rape, there is gang rape, there is defilement, there is sexual offenses by adults. So it depends on the circumstance and how it is presented, how the evidence is presented will lead you to the right definition. For example, if sexual harassment, for example, is contemplated in the context of a workplace, and you're saying that it is an instance where a co-worker or a superior or a representative of that superior makes sexual advances, requests for sexual intercourse or sexual contact or sexual activity, verbally, visually, it could be directly or indirectly. And basically stating that, if you do this for me, you will get this favor. That's one. They could say that if you do this, if you don't do it, then they will threaten you. So there is an issue of a threat, and it's also, it could be pegged on your future or present status at that workplace. As you've said, that there's sexual exploitation. So there is exploitation by a person who is in trust, or a person who is given, is in authority. For example, a kindergarten, and the teachers in that kindergarten, all right? So, or even in a prison setup, the prison warder could take advantage of the prisoners. So that is defined differently, and it has its own penalty. So the law looks at all these ingredients differently and gives, or rather provides different penalties for that. The Sexual Offences Act has been very instrumental in that, and that law gives, the law usually says that, for example, in penalties, it will say that if person X commits this, for example, sexual harassment, then they are liable, or they will be liable to a prison term of 3 years, or a fine of, let's say, 100,000, or both. Now, the Sexual Offences Act has gone further to provide the limit, in the sense that the court cannot give a lower term. For example, if it is rape, the court will say that if it's 18 years and above. So you can't go below 18 years. So the Sexual Offences Act was enacted to deter such activities, so to speak. And so basically, yes, the law does define and the law does outlaw, but we need to have progressive laws, in the sense that we need to amend especially the Sexual Offences Act, and we've had elusive attempts to amend the Sexual Offences Act, because basically the male dominated parliament usually say that it will really lean towards punishing the men more than, it will not really meet the ends that it should meet, but it will be a tool to subject men to sort of torture of some sense. Yes, and it is a bit, they're a bit uncomfortable with some of those progressive amendments that are being fronted by the Sexual Offences Act amendments.
And of course, you realize that most of the statistics that we have in the sub-Saharan Africa is that most of the sexual offenses are against women. But then nonetheless, there are men who even came out after this particular story to say that they have experienced forms of sexual violence and sexual exploitation at their workplace. Nonetheless, coming back to you, Cheruto, you'd notice that also, there was something in campus that people used to call it sex for grades. You'd realize that the other day there was a discussion about that some of the people who got maybe nominations for political seats and all that do not get it out of merit, or rather they get it through other means, which may also include sexual favors. Now, where do we cut the line between consent and sexual exploitation?
Just like Ms. Munywa has said, usually you find when we define it as coercion or exploitation, there's usually a power difference such that there's no balance of power between the perpetrator and the victim. You find that the perpetrator was in a really high position of power or influence. At times they're in positions of affluence. And that's when you find that the victim has no power at all. And when this difference exists between them, it's very difficult to say that this victim consented. Take a look at the expose in the tea farms. Take a look at those exposes on sex for grades and the ones that you're highlighting. Of course, we've not had an expose on disappointments, but there are rumors and discussions on online spaces that people did this to get to those positions. And it happens all the time because this person, the perpetrator, is always powerful, and they will use that influence to sexually exploit the victim. Most of the time, the victim has limited options. They look at their lives, they think, I need this job or I need this money. And they cannot even choose not to, they cannot choose to say no. Take, for instance, the women in the tea plantations. They would cry and say that this job, I need this job for my kids, or my kids will not go to school if I become jobless. So you see the victim has very little options there. They give in, they are doomed. They do not give in, they are still doomed. You see, their lives are at stake. So I would say there's usually a very big difference of powers between the perpetrator and the victim, and that creates. You cannot say that the victim consented. You'd find the perpetrators coming out to speak and say that huyu mtu ni mkubwa, this is an adult, this girl was big, this girl, or they just came to me, and trying to justify such kind of things. But there was a power difference, so it's impossible to say that even this person was at a consenting age, or to say that this person was an adult. Usually when there is a power difference, that qualifies as coercion. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Of course, you are tuned into the Morning Glory Show. It is the most comprehensive talk show in Kenya online today. We are coming live from Dawi Afrique Photography. Dawi Afrique Photography is situated in Eldoret, basement of the Zion Mall building. I believe Zion Mall is a landmark in this town. So anyone, if you just ask anyone in this town, if you're new, they'd be sure to show you where Zion Mall is. And I usually love using my guests. They can confirm that this is a very family friendly studio with enough space. So that means that anytime you have a family shoot, then consider walking into Dawi Afrique Photography. We're discussing sexual exploitation for those who just joined us, and imagining the expose that was done by BBC the other day. You notice that there is a sexual exploitation happening at workplace at the moment. We had the women rep for Nandi County, Cynthia Muge, coming out in parliament and saying this is happening in almost each and every setup where there is a boss somewhere wanting favors from the juniors for them to get, wanting sexual favors for them to maybe get other favors. I would put favors in quotes because nonetheless at some point it is your right, but then you have to give in something. And coming back to you, Miss Munywa, let's look at this in terms of evidence, because we usually say they who, or he who alleges must prove. This looks like consent. There is that, I would say, camouflage of consent, because you'd say these are two adults. And most of the time, the language people say is chini ya maji, because you'd realize even how it was schemed and all that. Somebody tells you, let's meet at location A at this particular time, and you'd have to say, okay, there is no much of discussion. How easy is it to prove such a case?
All right, thank you. So you're right, that's evidence on one. He who alleges must prove. So, or she who alleges must prove. So in this, the question that you just posed, let's talk pure evidence. A person comes to basically make a report that I have been sexually harassed. How does this happen? The law anticipates actually that sexual harassment will be handled administratively by the employer, all right? So if you look at the Employment Act, Section 6, it provides that every organization that has employees over 20 employees, then it must have a person who has been, an organization that has over 20 employees should have a policy against sexual harassment. So basically you're supposed to go to HR, right, and make a report there and say that I have been sexually harassed by X and X, and HR is, so that policy should allow, provide procedure, what should happen, what are the questions HR should ask, what should happen after HR has talked to this person. Basically, the ideal is that the HR should call the perpetrator and tell them that a report has been made against you and you're doing an independent investigation. It's going to be impartial. You're not going to be victimized, because there are instances where someone can give wrong information. So investigation should take place and basically lead up to disciplinary action, all right? But that's just on their job. But what happens if it goes beyond, if it becomes physical assault, for example? A person has felt, slighted, that this lady has refused me, so he goes ahead and slaps her, or forces himself on her and kisses her, or, caresses her. So by definition, we say that sexual harassment is unwanted, it is unsolicited. It means that she has not consented, all right? And there's this notion by African men mostly that a woman who actually says no one time maybe means yes. Probably she has to say no more than one time. So there's that, there are those instances where things could go beyond that and it becomes a police case. And that is where the Sexual Offences Act comes in. So indecent assault, all right? Indecent assault, and that could be touching the breasts, the thighs. So that is criminal, all right? And it attaches a criminal penalty. There is also, sexual harassment has also been outlawed under that particular act, 3 years or 100,000 Kenya shillings fine. So in those instances, this person is to go to the police, all right? And there's to make a report, and then investigation should ensue. But what happens right now when you go to the prison, they will take your statement, write it in the OB book, give you that OB, all right? and then you're told, okay, go. And then when you find that perpetrator, come back and tell us. But basically, the police is the investigator, all right? The police is they're supposed to, do independent investigation, and also, do the charge sheets, present them to the office of the public prosecutor, and then this perpetrator should be taken to court. But basically, there's some sort of leniency in terms of how investigations are conducted when it comes to sexual harassment. They will basically ask the lady, what had you worn that day? How do you behave before your boss? They always want to shame the victim. And so that has, that folly has the Parliament has tried to amend the Sexual Offences Act and actually get rid of such folly through amending those provisions and providing, like a section in the police that will deal specifically with sexual harassment or, sexual offenses, gender-based violence, so that they would be more aligned or more professional in terms of how they deal with such reports. But as it is right now, what we have is a system where we are just trying to cope with what the law provides, but no specific professionalism. And basically, like for example, even the BBC production, the expose, it indicates that Unilever, for example, there had been an expose initially, and then they came up with a policy, a no sexual harassment policy, all right? But the harassment is still ongoing. Why do you think so? In my opinion, I believe it is because Unilever, yes, may have that, to get away with any audits, for example. But in terms of institutionalizing it, making it a culture within Unilever, it could probably, be the missing link, right? So, and by that I mean that there should be a way where the organization will have posters within their premises. No, this is a no sexual harassment zone. They should have training, for example, for their staff. They should have, flyers or just things to do with, even when they're onboarding their employees, they are supposed to clearly state to them that this is a no sexual harassment zone. So, but these are things that are not happening, all right? And that is why a lot of sexual harassment and sexual exploitation cases go unreported. And of course, there's also that stigma that the victims go through, and so they fear. And also the fact that they're not aware. Awareness is important because it makes you assert your right, all right? If you know that the Constitution gives you the right to human dignity, it gives you the right to fair labor practices, it gives you the right to not be discriminated against, then such a person would be more assertive in advancing their rights. They would self-advocate. These are the people who will be on the front line in even telling their stories. I have been done this and that, all right? But if they're not aware, then the self-esteem and stigma issues come in at play. Then in that scenario, then such instances go unpunished, go unnoticed. Yes. So that is the challenge. But in terms of evidence has to be outlined. So you need, for example, if there's any DNA, for example, if it is a rape, or if someone hit you and you bled, keep those things, all right, safely so that it can be produced in court. But if you go and wash your clothes, then that means that the evidence, you're wiping it clean, and it would be hard to prove your case. Yes.
And of course, we shall be coming to that protection of evidence in case of such acts against you. Madam Ngeny, now I'll be calling you all the three names. I think for every question you have a new name. Nonetheless, it's
fine.
Okay. So, how did you end up here? Because you realize that you work so much with communities. What is the attitude of the society against towards sexual exploitation? Where do you think is the missing link?
Kalia, just like it has been highlighted, there are a lot of beautiful laws in place. There are acts that have been put in place to curb sexual offenses. Yet, very few of these victims will find justice. There's always a missing link in the implementation of these laws. You find down there's a victim, and it's very common for that victim to not to get justice because, for instance, in the community, there's a victim that has been raped. That is one of the most common, or defilement. It's one of the most common form of sexual abuse. We have this kumalizia nyumbani thing, you see. Or even if this person tries to pursue justice, you find that somehow, somewhere, they might not even find the required legal aid. Let's take, for instance, there are RCBOs and non-governmental organizations down there that try to create awareness. A victim can run to these organizations in search for help, but it stops at that. You find these organizations are just equipped maybe to create awareness, but beyond that, the victim might not find legal aid. Or just like Munyua was highlighting, unaenda, maybe you get that P3 forms, you've been assaulted, and then those people are telling you, maybe you go to the police and you're being told, okay, muona, do what? Make sure you call us. Now, the financial muscle of these victims, their knowledge on the law, you find that it's very minimal, such that they cannot pursue justice on their own. And it's quite unfortunate that it's even seen as a woman affair. When I saw the expose on the tea factory, on the tea farms, I was quite glad that the lead journalist was male, and I applauded that. Even though the lady Kate, the one that was posing as an employee, was a lady, I was really glad that the person that was taking the lead on this expose was male. It shows that we are having men that are really concerned about this issue, because even you see when we come to this show, you bring on board women. You find organizations that are fighting this are women-led or girl-led organizations. So there is still also a gap in this fight, because first, initially even gender-based violence and these forms of violence would be defined as violence against women, because like you had highlighted earlier, the victims are dominantly women and the perpetrators are dominantly male. So at one point, when you do not have the information, it looks like it's a women versus men affair, even though there are men who are victims, who can be victims of sexual or gender based violence. And when we say gender, it's just beyond being male and female. Someone can be having sexual characteristics, but they do not that suggest that they are female, but they might not identify as female. You can look at someone, they look like they have male characteristics, they do not identify as male. So whatever gender that someone identifies with, and they get maybe violence directed to them based on their identity or their orientations, that qualifies as gender-based violence. So back to my point that it's predominantly, the victims are majorly female. And I was highlighting that if we would have more men coming on board to fight this vice, I would comfortably say that most people in authority, we still have very few women in power. We still have very few women who can create influence that can be felt. And when it comes to such issues such as eradicating and fighting the vice of gender-based violence, if we had more men coming on board to help with the eradication of this vice, I bet we would make a significant progress, because they hold positions of power. Like, for instance, down in the villages, if the Mzee wa Muta was to stand against the fight against sexual and gender-based violence, would we have those courts that sit in the Muta and sort things kinyumbani? They would be on the front line to say that the victim has to get justice. And the moment we realize that the victims get justice, we would have very few cases. I was looking at the psychology of convicts, and specifically these ones who do sexual offenses. And most of them would admit that what made them, what held them not to commit the first crime that they ever committed was just the fear of being found or fear of being convicted. They've always wanted to assault, they've always wanted to touch that kid inappropriately, but something that kept holding them was the thought of, what if I get found, what if I'm convicted? So if we had more people being brought to book, if we had the law that are in place getting implemented effectively, the policies, the beautiful policies that protect sexual victims or victims of sexual and gender-based violence, if they were to be implemented, I bet we would make progress on the in very big strides, such that, back to my point of creating fear, when these people highlighted that they would really fear being caught, it shows that we can actually deter, or we could curb this vice if we implement those laws and people see that others are actually getting convicted. It would just create fear, and maybe we would lessen the number of sexual and gender-based violence. And it's just something that came to my mind about the issue of evidence. It's very hard for just some common girl to bring evidence against someone who has assaulted them. And that's a challenge that we organizations get when we are trying to pursue justice for the victims. Like in those exposés, that girl was carrying a camera, for instance. There are very many girls who will not be able to carry a camera. We are just listening to them on narration, such that the perpetrator, if given a chance, will deny vehemently. You even saw in this specific one for the Finlay and...
Somebody said God is my witness.
Sorry?
Somebody said God is my witness.
Yeah. In fact, someone who was caught on camera says, I have never done such a thing, and God is my witness. I mean, and it was, what saddened me the most is that these people will go to the media and talk like... Look at the crowds, talk to the people and tell them there's someone fighting me, wanataka kunimaliza kisiasa. You see such kind of things. I was looking at the expose on sex for grades from those universities in West Africa, and lecturers will go to media stations. Someone will come to you, Morning Glory show, and say, it is me who was caught in that expose, but as you can see, there are certain people who are trying to tarnish my name in this and this manner. It was funded, and as you can see, these people they intimidated maybe my brilliance, and you wonder, where will the masses cut the line between whether this victim was saying the truth or lying? She doesn't have evidence. She didn't carry the camera like the journalist that was bringing the expose to us. So there is quite a mix-up of issues, the failure to implement the laws, the systems or the CBOs that are in place are not even strengthened enough. They do not have the capacity to pursue justice for the victims and bring the perpetrators to book. And it's quite sad that most of the time even the perpetrators are very powerful people. So it's just a mix-up and a circle of a quite messy but serious situation. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Of course, if you're joining us right now, you tuned into the most comprehensive talk show in Kenya. This is the Morning Glory Show, coming live from Dawi Afrique Photography in Eldoret. With me, two ladies. We have Miss Munywa and Miss Ngeny. Both of them are just trying to help us understand the GBV, the menace of GBV, and here we're trying to look at where did we actually miss the mark, where did we sleep, and getting back to you, Ms. Munywa, you've talked about the issue of evidence. Before you even go to the issue of evidence, what are the common mistakes that victims make when filing cases for GBV? What are these obvious mistakes that they do make that could spoil their possibility of filing a substantial case?
Thank you for that question. I think let me just piggyback on her previous comment and say that Kenya does implement its laws. The judiciary is doing a great job at implementing, all right? So once a case comes to court and there is proper evidence, we have people serving time real time, all right, life sentences, and such. And so we cannot say that the law is not being implemented. It is being implemented. Basically, what we have as a problem is what I had outlined initially, that some of the police really don't take, for example, this sexual harassment, sexual exploit. They don't feel it to be so, like, why are you here? Someone just touched you, you know. But
Kuguzwa tu. Umeguzwa tu.
yes, but you see now the serious now offenses, now those ones, they are being tackled, but the police don't take like indecent assault as a serious issue, right? So basically, so that is the issue. And then the issue of stigma really affects. So you had asked what are the obvious mistakes. Of course, it's bathing, not ensuring that the evidence is taken, all right, into the custody of the investigating officers. So you wash your clothes, you wash your body. For example, swabs need to be taken and what have you. So when you go for the P3, all that can be seen are the soft tissue injuries and, you know, but not like the semen cannot be found because you washed yourself. So I know it's an indignifying process, all right, to keep, because basically you are the specimen. But I would advise victims to, and ultimately it's their choice, but if they can be able to sustain that themselves, you know, and allow for that process to take place, for them to be looked at and for that evidence to be drawn from them, I think it is going to help them in advancing their case. Another issue is that especially I get to see this in court. There are people who are afraid to speak out, to even be seen, to even be cited, you know, Ann Munywa versus Fulani. So, and what I need to tell the masses is that the courts, through the Sexual Offences Act, can declare a witness as vulnerable. And once that happens, this witness or this person or this victim will be given witness protection, in the sense that when they're testifying, they can be hidden away from the public and give their evidence there. They can use an intermediary to pass their story across. They can request for a statement from someone else to give an account of how of the trauma that they have gone through and what have you. They can also be allowed to, you know, testify in camera, okay? We have cases of such nature. You see when they're being cited, it's AM versus PM, you know?
You don't know the names.
You don't know the names.
Once upon a time when I was reporting a case about, I think it was about murder, and no, it wasn't about murder, because I think somebody had been killed, and there was a witness who was supposed to come to court. So your time anaitwa akafanya Jesus. And right at that time nikajua hiyo kesi imeisha. By the time alikuwa anafika mbele ana kesi imeenda. So I think also familiarity with court, I don't know how we can do that, because you realize that it is also an issue. Nonetheless,
yes, so Kalia, you're doing a good job, in the sense that what you're doing today here is important, because it is providing awareness, right? And civic education. Someone out there needed to hear what is being said today. So, and that is the first step. As I just said initially, awareness and empowerment really helps someone to self-advocate, okay? And we have, even like, even at the prison, when we have people who are, for example, wrongly convicted and what have you, when they become self-aware, when they become aware of the laws and what have you, they become really proactive in advancing their causes. And that is what I am saying today here, is that even the victims, once they learn that, and by the way, there are people who are perpetrators and they don't know that they are, you know, perpetrators, that they are sexually harassing, for example, a coworker. For example, just sending a porn video to to a person or an explicit video to a co-worker, that is sexual harassment. Okay, so and there are people who don't know that, but and even the recipient doesn't know that, okay, even receiving this is sexual harassment being advanced towards me. So and such instances, that's why we're saying that if we continue speaking about such topics and people become aware, then we are even entrenching a different culture, because a person will become aware and know that when this happens, and of course I feel uncomfortable, I feel undignified. So, oh, that's the reason. So this is sexual harassment. So I can get, I can get redress for this. So, and this is important because this kind of empowerment is really the starting point for that particular individual seated at home, wondering what to do with the information or what has happened to them. And it really assists. And so, yes, this is really good work that you're doing.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Of course, if you're already tuned in, this is the Morning Glory Show. I can see some of the comments coming in. There's somebody called Honorable Francis Rono. The other name is Chitapketik, saying, Mulika hotels, Pia, those really suffer. She's saying before they are given jobs, managers demand for sleeping with them. Eldoret is worse. Of course, Wakili here has talked about the issue of evidence. There is also somebody saying, Ebu. Okay, thank you so much for tagging in, friends there. I can see Nick Arab Cheriat saying, following. Tirop Kiprotich saying, good morning, tuned in from Mosoriot. Hosea Changlet says, Social Square, saying, greetings and peace. Good morning. Good morning to you, and thank you for always making time to be with us. Thank you so much, Mildred, for making time to be with us. Of course, I'll continue sampling more comments as we continue. I think as we continue to get into this, you realize that, okay, so many people who had gone through such instances, many of them would prefer to do it via inbox, and you'd wonder what happens now if they're supposed to even appear in court. And working somewhere, I've had a chance of coming across a clear case of sexual exploitation. I was at the CCTV room of a certain company I've worked for, and I saw something weird, and I was able to capture it and even get it out. Now, when I called the lady to ascertain or even tell them that I was aware of what happened, you'd notice that they are not even willing for it to come out. And later, you realize that it started as abuse. Then at some point, I don't know if people get comfortable with it, because I really don't know how it happens. Maybe I need to go back to come back to you, Madam Ngeny, and explain to us, how does it reach a point whereby a perpetrator, okay, a victim now agrees to all of this? Because at some point I would see them working together, I would see them. Does it mean that they are now getting comfortable with it? How does it happen to an extent that somebody reaches an extent now to not even wanting it get reported? What is happening in our societies right now?
Yes, Kalia, just like I had said earlier, it is just a mess that is really serious, such that when you think of how comfortable we are getting with it, or how usual it is looking, it's scary. So you find in such a case the perpetrator actually grooms the victim, such that they get to that point and it feels like it's okay. You see, now you are even trying to maybe you even had the interest of getting justice for them, or getting them out of that. But already they feel that they have a relationship, they have developed a bond. I don't know what those kind of bonds are called. We should try and I should try and research on that.
It's a subject of research.
Yes.
But then I realized that it's something that even went along and became long term. Looks like a relationship.
Yes, you even find this person. It can be even an institution like a school, and it's a teacher and a student. A very big age difference. And I'd also like to highlight the fact that there are policies in place in these institutions. Look at the expose. I'll keep referring to that because I know that's what most of us have watched. You see, when these perpetrators were introducing these new workers to the institution, they kept mentioning that there is a zero tolerance policy to sexual harassment. This is a zero tolerance okay, this institution does not tolerate sexual exploitation, sexual harassment in any form. And they even go ahead to tell you that there is a department. You remember even the lady Katie, the one that was doing the investigation. She went ahead and even reported in the department. And there is red tape in that department because they already know what is existing. So that's why I was highlighting that the policies are existing. So I'll even draw that question back to Munywa, that if up there you'll just be waiting for people to transit to the courts, do you understand what happens here? Do you understand the roadblocks like now that exist in the institutions, that exist in the departments that you are banking on? Do you understand that they silence the victims? And what do you do from up there as the judiciary to try and weed out those to bring up the victims, to ensure they get justice? Because it's quite sad that, like that lady was going to the department that's supposed to be helping her, and they're asking her, na si uhakikishe tu you make your stand.
Tumia akili.
Usifanye mtu akunini, don't allow them to sexually exploit you. But already they are going through the exploitation, but they do not deal going upwards. They even planned to organize for a psychosocial support. They organized for counseling for these victims. But what happens to the perpetrator? So at times we have all these systems, but they're very cosmetic, nothing beyond that. The people seated there are employed, they work with the bosses, and I'll keep referring to these exposes because I know that this is what people have been viewing. Take, for example, this Sex for Great exposes that was done in Ghana. This perpetrator will come and bring these people in the departments. Na anasema, even my secretary knows that this lady has been coming to my office to seduce me. Even this department knows that this lady has been going around talking to lecturers in such and such a manner. So those policies exist. There are measures in these institutions that look like they are about to eradicate the vice, but in the true sense, or what happens ideally, is that they are the main perpetrators. They silence the victims. When will we ever get to hear the voice of the victims? Do you know that the perpetrator purely thrives on that silence? And if you're an agent of silencing the perpetrator, then there is no way that that perpetrator is ever going to get justice. No matter how much policy we have, no matter how much we say we have zero tolerance to harassment. So that's it, Kalia.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And of course, we are now trying to head into the resolution bit of it. What are some of these things that we can do to try and improve the, I would say, conviction of perpetrators? How do we make sure that we end the vice? Of course, I'm sure Ms. Munywa will be giving us the perspective of how we can make sure that we use the law to sort this out. There's also the moral bit of it. How do we fashion ourselves as a society to make sure that we reduce the number of cases that people are exploited, specifically sexual exploitation?
Thank you, Kalia. So let me also answer before I get to that, consent. So consent is an interesting topic because I can consent now and refuse consent in the next 1 minute. So your question on, you have been seeing these people together, they eat lunch, so this lady could be thinking that this is my lunch buddy, but she does not specifically want to have sexual intercourse or whatever, or to go to even have sexual contact with such a person. So consent is determined by the person giving it, all right? And it could be withdrawn at any time, even husband and wife. Even consent is that critical. So that is, I think that is what we should have at the back of our minds as victims. There's this concept that the victim was, playing along. She was being dined, and and by the way, for example, the sexual harassment issue, it could happen on site at work or off site. So maybe you've gone to outside Kenya, for example, for a work trip. that is still harassment. If you get harassed sexually there, it still falls under sexual harassment, and you can go to court and get redress for that. Also, to talk about the issue of cosmetic laws and cosmetic policies and all that. The truth of the matter is that it is what it is, okay? At the end of the day, it is the victim who has to bring and present themselves and say that this is what has happened to me. And to such an extent, then, the civic society or the NGOs and the CBOs, they really come in to play a critical role, because they provide a sort of a safe house and shelter for such people, and actually give them the voice and give them the backing that they require or they desire in order to advance their cases, okay? So I think to that extent, then, the judiciary can do so much, because the bench will sit there and wait for cases to come to them. They cannot go, it is against their code of conduct to go and proactively look for cases and, be engaged with the victims as victims. They can only engage with the victims as the complainant, okay? So that is that. The other thing is to come out, just come out. In America, coming out really assisted them. The Me Too campaign, someone came out and then another person and then another person. It became a culture in the sense that men are now aware that ladies can come out. Okay, you don't touch a lady without her permission. You don't approach a lady indecently without her permission. So there is that concept that we need to come out as ladies and speak about these vices. Come out as men who are facing such gender biases and gender offenses and speak about them. So to your question, we have avenues to seek redress on a criminal nature. I have spoken about the Sexual Offences Act. So what has been done to you? It should be outlined in a charge sheet. There should be evidence in the form of a P3, in the form of investigation that has happened, in the form of the clothes or whatever it is that was taken from the scene and from yourself. So that's one aspect. So, and from that, the perpetrator is fined, the perpetrator could be imprisoned. That's one aspect. The other aspect is the civil, you can go to court from a civil perspective and seek damages, all right? The law holds the employer accountable. So in this case, for example, organization, say BOMA, let's not talk about BOMA, what could we say?
Dawi Africa, very nice media.
All right, so organization Dawi Africa, for example, has 20 or so employees, and so it is incumbent upon them to have this no harassment policy. And an employee there becomes harassed sexually. They go to HR, and HR does nothing. The position that Ms. Sharon was talking about earlier, HR does nothing. And probably it's your employer who is the perpetrator, actually the head of this organization. Of course, they're going to do nothing. So what happens to such a person? She can go to court, ask for damages. And what the court would be looking at is whether these advances were unwanted, unsolicited, and whether they created an unfriendly environment, an unfriendly work environment, whether they threatened her position, her status in the employment. For example, if she was released or given a suspension or whatever that led up to a final, exit from work. If there is a nexus, and this person can provide, and some of these things happen through emails, okay? She can provide even that email, texts. These are evidence. These are evidence. So she can provide this nexus and say that this and this happened, and that ultimately led to my summary dismissal. And in that case, the court will award damages to this person payable by the employer. all right? Even if it is a co-worker who did it, it is the employer who will be charged, who will pay that damages, those damages. She could also go to court on a constitutional petition, the right to human dignity, the right to non-discrimination, and the right to fair labor practices. She can say that these are provisions that have been infringed at my workplace, and because of that, then I want a declaration that I have been sexually harassed, and because of that, I want damages to this effect. And we have cases, like in 2014, there's a case of a very interesting case of a lady. She had been given a job, I think, at Runda, and her work was to do field work. She was to go to the field and take a specimen from farmers. But along the job, she was to travel outside, and guess who was her travel buddy? Her employer. So she goes with the employer to, I think it was to Sweden, through South Africa. And when they get to South Africa, boom, a room has been booked and it's one room. So she's supposed to sleep in the same room with her boss. And she's not in that space. She's like, no, I won't do that. So she slept on the floor as the boss slept on the bed. And it's a foreign country, so she really had no choice. So beyond that, they went to Sweden, and there he got physically, abusive to her, even slapped her, and she somehow just took a plane back. She was like, no, this is not what I signed up for. And when she came back to Kenya, she went to court, and clearly there were emails and actually she had been summarily dismissed later, like a week later, and she was awarded damages of 3 million. We have such instances, and of course, the damages they fluctuate on case-to-case basis. But these people get redress, and that's what I'm saying. That the laws are being implemented. What is happening is that people are not coming out to say. They're self-stigmatizing, and then the society also is stigmatizing. But if we just come out, again, I will insist on that. If we come out, then it becomes like a Me Too campaign. Like everyone, even if it is your word against mine, do you have evidence? Present it. Let the court look at you. Let the court look at your demeanor as you're speaking to the court, as you're giving your evidence. There are systems that are put in place to protect you. Even if you're vulnerable, I've just explained that you can be given protection. You can testify in camera. You don't have to present your issues to the world. So come out and speak about these things. Come out and bring cases, civil cases, criminal cases. The law is there to protect every human being and to ensure that human dignity is preserved.
Okay, somebody here talking about the time it takes between you reporting the case and you getting justice. How long is that in a typical situation where there is evidence?
Where there is evidence and okay, so if it's a criminal case, it's the prosecutor who is doing the case. And so once the witnesses are available, the witness statements are available, the police file is there, and the witness gives the evidence, then the other side is supposed to come and the court is supposed to make a ruling that the other side has a case to answer. And once that is in place, then they're supposed to provide witnesses, to counter the evidence that the prosecution has given. There are instances where the courts themselves are sick, okay? The court is sick, so case will not go on. There are instances where the police file is not there. There are instances where the prosecutor is sick, all right? So there are those instances where there are adjournments, all right? We call them adjournments. And ultimately, they contribute to the time and the length of time that these cases take. But ultimately, if everything, in an ideal situation, utopia kind of situation, we are talking about 6 months. 6 months. For civil, I think it's almost the same thing. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Of course, we are coming back to you, Madam Ngeny, for a solution, possible solutions to this kind of abuse. How do we reach a point in society where we can reduce this and say we've conclusively maybe dealt with the issue of sexual harassment? How do we reduce it to a level whereby we would say maybe there are isolated cases?
There's a gap in awareness. And for such a campaign as the one that Anne was highlighting, the Me Too campaign, to even take effect or to even, get provoked, it would call for an awareness that is created in the society for someone to first feel safe, that they can speak out, for someone to even feel like they will not be stigmatized. So there is need for, right now you find that it's just these organizations, CBOs, women-led or girl-led organizations that are creating awareness in their own spaces. And in 2021, the government of Kenya had come up with a few commitments, around 12 commitments, that were aimed at trying to eradicate gender-based violence by the year 2026. And if we were to follow on such commitments, one of them was partnering with CBOs and organizations that are in the grassroots to create awareness. These are organizations that are in touch with the people. These are organizations that can take up educating the masses really effectively. So once we have such education, people can feel comfortable to come up and even deal with this issue with less stigma. Another issue is financing, such that if we financed, for instance, surveys, or we finance research on approaches that are going to be effective. Let's say in the health departments, for instance, whenever they are having any of these surveys on different demographics, they include maybe indicators of GBV or sexual violence, such that we have data. And whenever we have data, it informs designs and programs that can be used to approach that education. It can be used to approach in addressing the several needs that will have been highlighted. And of course, there is the issue of victims that do not even know where to go to. We do not have safe houses. The police are not as informed as we would want them to be, such that we still find instances of, like he was saying, you go to the police and they're telling you, alikuguza tu nyinyi wasichana wa siku hizi mumekuwa watoto wa Serelak.
Sisi tulikuwa tunaibiwa, tunapelekwa kwa kina mtu.
So you see, there is still a lot, and that calls for budgeting. How can we do education without budget? How do we do research? How do we design these programs? How do we come together with as CBOs or to work with the governments and in eradicating sexual and gender-based violence if there is no budget or nobody is willing to come out here and partner with us? So those are some of the approaches, research that can lead to evidence-based solutions, creating safe houses, ensuring that, and while they're in these safe houses, are they just going to stay there? In case, if we have a fund, once they're in these safe houses, we get to empower them. They do not have to go back to the perpetrator, which is sadly the case in most instances, because a victim comes out, but they still have to go back to the perpetrator. We even have a case in my village where a perpetrator is living in the same house with a victim of defilement, a very small girl. Apparently, this man would cohabit with the mother, but he still comes to this same house and possibly continues defiling the child, which is, there could be several other cases like that. We are hoping that case would be, the child will get justice and that man will be brought to book. But those are some of the instances. We wouldn't wish for victims to keep going back to the society, going back to the perpetrators. And more so, the perpetrator should not go back to the society to create more victims. He's going back to defile. Why would we think that when they go back, they are going to reform? What has reformed them? The spirit is still within them. They could defile anyone. an adult. They could rape an adult, they could define a child, they could be fetish offenders, those ones that put cameras in places and intrude in people's privacy, such kind of things. So I think those are some of the approaches that would help us make some strides in the fight against sexual exploitation. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Catastrophic as it sounds, it's happening in our society today. But nonetheless, time is moving and we only have 4 minutes. So I'll have to go to Ms. Munywa for her closing remarks.
Okay, so Kalia, I think this topic has been very enlightening. I think, let me just talk about the issue of the child who lives with the perpetrator. I think beyond pursuing the perpetrator, there should also be, rather the society should know that the child can be protected and can be given, so you can go to court for protection and care orders, okay? Care and protection orders, so that the child can be removed from such a scenario.
Where are they taken to?
Of course, they'll be taken into the system, but I think it would be better for them to be in the system than to be at home where they're being exposed to a defiler. So it's, and if there are cases where there are safe houses, of which I don't think there is one in Kenya, but in advanced states there are safe houses, or there are custody, there are systems where even families can take on such children. And in Kenya, we are actually getting to such, but not actively. But I'm sure that if we make petitions and we provide evidence to court that this is a safer place for the child to be in than in the place that they're in, then the court would give such orders. Of course, with proper, follow-ups and all that, it can work. So I think also to just summarize, I would say that let us empower women. Let us empower men. Let us empower the worker. Let us empower the children. Let us inculcate a culture where harassment is not being glorified. Let us empower, or rather impute a narrative in men more so, that a woman can say no, and that does not mean yes. All right. And that does not mean that they disrespect you or that they hate you. It's just that they are saying no, respect my space. And that no could eventually change to a yes, or a yes could change eventually to a no. But and we're not saying that in the workplace there should be no, lovers in the workplace. It happens, and once they declare to HR, that's proper. But if this employee is saying no, then that no should be respected. And so I think ultimately my take home, I think, message would be, let us empower women, let us create awareness, let us create an avenue where there's safety in people coming out to speak about the offenses that have been caused upon them. Yes.
Okay. Chebu Nicodemus all the way from Dar es Salaam says hi. Anasema Sharon Ngeny is the incoming county women representative. Okay.
Wow.
And then as we stir up, Felix Iprotich says, hey Kalia, I once visited somewhere just at the show and I met a big number of ladies waiting there. Little did I know that they're waiting for fishermen to arrive, only to be given 3 or 5 fish in exchange for sexual favors. Is this sexual exploitation? Who do we blame here? Of course, I think we've talked about this so much that we may not want to go back to it because of time. But then you realize that, of course, as much as it looks transactional, at the end of it, it translates to sexual exploitation. Okay, thank you so much. I think we'll be coming to Madam Ngeny for your parting shot.
Thank you. The show has been quite interactive in a nice way. I've learned from Miss Anne. And just to to give a comment on Tirop's comment. As long as there is no consent, it becomes exploitation. But if it's welcome, like Anne was highlighting, if the two are okay with that kind of transaction, then it's not exploitation.
It isn't exploitation?
When it's unwelcome, that's when it becomes exploitation, right? But if the two are agreeing to that, then, well, we can still come back to
but then it is
discussing.
a very big discussion,
It is
because
very
nonetheless
big.
it is transactional. That means it is pegged on, because if we can classify prostitution as sexual exploitation, then I think that would also clearly fall into sexual exploitation. The problem is now prosecuting it in court could mean something else because of evidence and consent. Anyway.
Yes, that calls for a lot of, a detailed look into all those variables and factors.
Let me just so prostitution is not outlawed. What is outlawed is soliciting, right? So so prostitution as an item is not.
It's not
Because
okay. So soliciting, okay, which also proving it is another issue.
Yes, and then another issue is people under 18 years cannot consent. Yes, okay.
Okay,
So-
in this case, I think Tirop is talking about mature women. Anyway, nonetheless, let's allow you to take to get your parting shot.
Yesterday when I was preparing for the show, when you made a call, there's a friend of mine who called and vehemently wanted me to mention the fact that the boy child faces harassment, sexual harassment, and gender-based violence too. That there's violence that's directed to them also, based on their gender. And I thought I shouldn't leave before highlighting that. And maybe you can also create time for them to come and discuss the issue of the boy child, and the fact that there are not a lot of organizations that are championing for that factor, or we do not have a lot of statistics on that, or maybe why the boy child doesn't come out to speak. So my parting shot, it is quite unfortunate that this serious kind of offense has looked normal, such that even when that expose was being discussed, people are just brushing it that, si inafanyika, it happens all the time. Why do we want to normalize? And then it's unfortunate also that the victim is the one that carries the shame. Can we take responsibility upon ourselves as institutions, as at our personal levels, as employers, as people in the workplace? Can we take it upon ourselves to fight this vice of sexual exploitation or sexual harassment? We can shift the shame to the deserving person who is the perpetrator. The victim does not deserve any shame. Shift the shame to the perpetrator. And I believe with all the approaches that we've discussed, we can make strides towards eliminating this vice that is really, really ailing us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you so much, ladies, for making time to be with us. Also to our viewers, thank you so much for making time to be on the Morning Glory Show. Because here up says, great discussion. Thanks for enlightening us. Thank you so much for also making time to be with us on the Morning Glory Show. I think tomorrow being Friday is a very relaxed day. We'll also still be talking about sports, but in this case we'll be talking to it in relation still to GBV, because we'll be talking about the fundraise being organized by Coach Alel Samoe University, among other institutions, in remembrance of Tirop, who was also a victim of gender-based violence. Of course, if you're on the broadcast, the broadcast will remain there. If you just joined us, of course, the link remains on the page and you're able to review it later. But then from me, on behalf of everyone who made this broadcast a success, thank you so much for making time to be on the Morning Glory Show. My name is MC Kalia. Until tomorrow, Mungu akubariki.